Yeah, I think in this case, it's garbage in and danger out, right? I mean, it's like making very important decisions and crew safety and planet safety, all these things that are important. We are making data quality the most important thing for us, okay? Because everything that will come out of it will be based on that. Can we trust the data?
That was the voice of Ali Riaz, CEO of OrbitMI. This is a great chat where we explore what OrbitMI is up to, the role of data integrity in the industry, and the state of play when it comes to the investment landscape for our space. It was a wide-ranging talk that I think you're going to like and really sets the tone for this year and beyond for our podcast. Don't forget, if you like the podcast, please leave a 5-star review. I also have a Buy Me the Coffee link in the show notes and in the newsletter. What is that? Well, instead of contributing via Patreon or other ways, I have set up this kind of one-off Buy Me a Coffee. Why should you contribute? Well, this helps me pay for some of the cost of producing the show. It's not a bank breaker, but it adds up, and I appreciate your support. For those that have already supported it, thank you very much. So sit back, relax, and now onto the podcast. Welcome, everyone, and you are listening to The Last Dinosaur, and I'm your host, Chris Aversano. Today's guest is Ali Riaz, CEO of OrbitMI. As the CEO of OrbitMI, a SaaS platform company serving the maritime and energy professionals, Ali oversees the development and delivery of solutions that are built by experts for experts that generate significant ROI for users. For those that don't know, OrbitMI was spun out of Stena Bulk AB as an independent software company. And that was a few years ago when, and then subsequently, Ali came on board. Welcome, Ali, to the podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much, Chris. Happy to be here.
I find it interesting, and I hope everybody finds it interesting. We have a software company, and we've seen this from a few different, fairly large ship owners. And in this case, it was Stena Bulk that has, started something. It build something to where they got to the point where they spun it out independently, which I think is interesting because it shows an organic growth, of a product. Tell us a little bit about what OrbitMI is up to today and kind of what is really happening.
Starting with what you just mentioned about some of the leaders in the industry coming up with their innovations and making them available to rest of the world. Actually, that is very normal. That is the pattern you see in fintech, financial services technologies. You see that in life sciences, whether it's pharmaceutical or other areas, clinical trials and so on. And the reason for that is that very often it's the innovators themselves inside the industry that truly understand the problem or the opportunity. They can feel it. They sense it. They know what the solution should be. When they look outside to the commercial world and try to satisfy their needs, very often they find out that such technologies do not exist yet. And so if you think about fintech, just to compare, I've seen numbers up to 65% of the companies that are serving the digital needs of financial service companies actually coming out of Bank of America and Wells Fargo and so on. So, and so no doubt some of the companies that are spinning off digital capabilities like Stena Bulk. Stena Bulk has a reputation for innovation, whether that's on the vessels themselves or how they operate or business model. I remember growing up in Norway and seeing all those Stena ferries. So I grew up with the Stena brand all over. And I remember when they were the first ones to put their huge Stena logo on the vessels and essentially said that they stand behind the quality of the operations. And that was new. And so, growing up in Scandinavia, you get to know Stena very well. I had a lot of respect for them even before I engaged with them on the Orbit side. I think it leads to your question, what's going on? And what's going on is that maritime industry is seeing unprecedented amount of volatility. Some man-created, some nature-created. But when you pull it all together, it becomes extremely difficult to rely only on our memory and and phone calls, it becomes more important to have digital records and digital processes that will help us deal with this volatility. So volatility is, weather, like in New England, always say, if you don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes, it'll change, right? That's true for weather routing, which is such an important part of shipping. It's not enough to get a manual consultant to provide you a weather route and then upload that in your ECDIS. And then 2-3 days later, that route is already outdated. So the speed of things that needs to happen, and regulatory, you can wait till all the regulatory is done and decided, but then you're going to be non-compliant. So you got to stay abreast of what's happening there and changes in the calculations and changes in timing of regulations. So you can't really step away from them. So all this volatility, geopolitical, sanctioned ports, I mentioned weather already, which I think is a huge part. All these things making digital solutions more relevant, more necessary. And that's what's going on. That's why Orbit was created. That's the storm that we find ourselves in.
One of the more interesting things that kind of came about recently with you guys, and it's a positive thing. It's something that I kind of stepped back when I heard the news back in September, and I thought, wow, this is pretty good. Is your recent partnership with one of the major classification societies, BV, because they have to touch upon a lot of the regulatory and mandatory type things. Talk a little bit about that, not only in kind of your specific sense of what you guys are doing, but the greater kind of good of collaboration and kind of a little bit of spinning off of what you said, which is software in other industries are built out of companies, and here's a chance for you to embed yourself with a company and build something even further. Talk about kind of that, that trend in our industry a little bit.
It's probably the best thing that's happened to Orbit is the partnership with Bureau Veritas, and there's several reasons for it. I'll start with the most basic one, which is data validation. I hear it over and over again. People want to do analysis. They want to understand the data. They want to do something with the data, but they don't always trust the quality of the data. And more than any other vertical that I've ever touched, in maritime, data is a mess. And a lot of time people say to me that, maritime companies are not utilizing data as much as they could. Frankly, they're smart not to utilize that data because very often it's wrong. So I'd rather have no information than wrong information, right?
Yeah, I think the old saying, right? Garbage in, garbage out. You got to be careful. That's one of the big, definitely the big pitfalls.
Yeah, I think in this case, it's garbage in and danger out, right? I mean, it's like making very important decisions and crew safety and planet safety, all these things that are important. By working with the Bureau Veritas, we are making data quality the most important thing for us, okay? Because everything that will come out of it will be based on that. Can we trust the data? So getting the entire system certified, getting all our data sets validated through all kinds of different mechanisms, through machine learning, through correlation studies, through all these other capabilities we have, where we can take, for example, ETS from 4 different areas, and then we can create a probabilistic value on which ETS is probably the right. Simple things like that. And I think until companies like us don't take the data quality seriously, we are not going to allow and help the industry take advantage of digital platforms. So we went to the core of it, and that was a very important part. The second thing is 2 themes that are really emerging. One is optimization, and the other one is compliance. And in both areas, we need more data sets. We need more deep science. And, Bureau Veritas, they've been around for a few years, 196 years. They have.
You could say that. Yeah.
And so they have enormous amount of data, enormous amount of subject matter expertise that, any company that's less than 1,000 people is small company. We're a small company. We just couldn't have that type of breadth and depth that our clients actually need. Some are going to need simple weather routing. Others are going to need more details on predictive analytics. They're going to need more data sets like wave and wind and currents. And, some people are going to be okay with just port data, but others are going to need polygons and berths. And, so we know that deeper science and more subject matter expertise that we can bring to each customer. And our customers they range from, we've onboarded 850 vessels for one customer, and we have onboarded 3 vessels for another customer. So we have full range because we have pure SaaS solution. We can scale up and scale down. And the third reason is that Bureau Veritas, Maritime is global. That's you're going from one port to another. You're at least regional, and most of them are global. So we need to have global support. We need to have global outreach. We need to be present with our clients wherever they are. And Bureau Veritas has only 1,600 offices around the world. And that allows us and we've trained over 500 Bureau Veritas people since we started this relationship. So we will be able to provide real support in real time in local regions. So very excited about these 3 reasons. Apart from that, great people, extremely knowledgeable what they do. They have never made a digital investment before. This is the first digital investment. They have a lot of technology products that they use to serve their customers, but they thought long and hard. They did over 20 due diligences. So we are very honored that they selected to work with us.
I think it's, really interesting because if you look at just that space alone, right, you look at DNV and you look at ABS with their product and you could just go down the list. And I thought, boy, what a great, set of dance partners. That was just my initial kind of take on that. Pivoting a little bit, and you brought up one of the big challenges in the space, and that is, data integrity, right? Yeah, I love the saying. I just wrote it down when you said it, garbage in, danger out. I think that's we're going to release this in January. That may be one of the quotes of 2024. I kind of like that so far. So that'll be in the early running. I really like that quote. But beyond that, what are some of the other challenges that you face? And I'd like you to think about this in terms of change management, because that is one of the themes, tongue in cheek. The name of the podcast is, The Last Dinosaur. We're one of the last industries to really, adopt and adapt digital technologies. Do you still kind of get that feeling of, resistance and is that a challenge for when you go and you speak to clients about your product, setting aside for a minute the concerns around data integrity as you work, with partners to kind of solidify that end of it?
I've changed my mind about this topic, so I want to share with you what I thought.
Oh, that's great. I love, because that shows a real good, part of emotional intelligence, right? That you could be persuaded to have your, mind change with the set of facts. So I'd love to, I'm excited to hear this.
Very, very sure about my position. And I've changed it now. So let me start with where I was. When I first entered Maritime, a lot of the other software vendors, data vendors, they shared that they felt the client base, the target market, ship owners, pool managers, they were not quick to adopt new technologies. And I've sensed some of that when I first started to go out and talk to people about what we do. But I realized that that's not true. What I realized is that every industry has its threshold for barrier to entry. So, for example, in fintech or more forgiven versus life sciences, life sciences data has to be extremely accurate and trackable and auditable and all that stuff. So they all have different thresholds. And what's happened really, when I see maritime industry at large, I see them actually adopt technologies that make sense, that have the right price point, that have the right kind of like a way to engage with it, right? Obviously, we know that satellite data, that obviously makes sense, but that was the most fierce adopter of that is maritime industry, right? My understanding now is that we the vendors, we that are serving companies, we have to do a much better job at data quality, at making our product accessible by leveraging cloud, truly leverage cloud and not put more and more boxes on the vessel. There's so many things we can do to reduce the barrier to entry on innovation. And frankly, I don't want to plug Orbit too much here, but one of the criteria that Sena had was that it's future-proof, meaning that you have integration ready, that you can integrate with new data sets and modular, so you can change the calculation for each of those CII calculation or EU ETS calculations or whatever. It requires no hardware or download, so that you can onboard a vessel in 2 minutes through a HTML link. So there was like really tough, difficult, challenging criteria for success that was put in front of Orbit. And today we live by those principles still. I would say that it's a crowd that know what they want and clearly have opinions about how things should be. If I believe that they are slow to adopt technologies, then I'm not going to take on the important mission of making it easier for people to adopt innovation.
Right.
So that's my feel. I do feel that there are many companies that have tried different pilots and different capabilities, and unfortunately, many of them have experienced lack of the results or lack of performance that they expected. So there are skeptics there, and
right.
We have earned it through not serving them right. So one of the things I advocate when I'm talking to the market in general, but also specific potential customers, I always tell them that here's a checklist of what you need to look at. Are you paying for development? Are you paying for a pilot?
Right.
Are you paying for? Is it going to take 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, 18 months before you see the first positive impact? Are they going to learn to shave on your face, basically? So if all those things are happening, and is the pricing unclear? Is it convoluted, right? Do you have to keep paying? Do you have to pay for training? Because if you're paying for training, that's probably hard to train them. So the product is probably not that user-friendly. So there's a lot of these things that we know from the digital world that we look at when we buy digital products. And we're trying to share that with our customers and prospects so they can also utilize these checklists and make sure that they're not walking into another 18 months of spending time and money. There are a lot of new people entering this industry with a lot of new titles.
Yeah.
Chief data officer or chief compliance officer and data scientist and
yeah.
So there are new people coming in. But I do think that when it comes to pure innovation, very often it has to come from the industry itself because they promise.
Yeah, it does. One of the interesting things that I had a guest come on in the fall, Scott Bergeron of Ohlendorf, and he said, Chris, he said, I disagree with you on the title of The Last Dinosaur or something to that effect. And I found it interesting because his view was, and I think it's a theme, it's a little variation of the theme of what you're saying. And that is, he said, we will adopt technology, but it has to be able to undergo the rigors of the of shipping. And I think he was talking not only about what you're talking about, but the physical, like, can a piece of technology, he was talking more about, let's say, some, I not directly, but I assume, things like scrubbers and other things, like what's going to happen to the ship? Will it fall apart? Will it be able to sustain salt, saltwater environment, these sorts of things, which is very different than other types of land-based technologies that don't undergo the rigors and the vibrations and the saltwater exposure. And I think what you're saying is just a variation on that theme in terms of adoption. Pivoting a little bit, one of the things that you brought up is the barrier to entry, right? And I love the fact how you went through all of the different points of barrier entry and kind of how to go through this and providing your group a checklist, your clients a checklist. I think it's an interesting approach. The other big barrier to entry, especially from the vendor side, is is, money and investment. And other industries that been involved in, and we could talk about kind of a little bit, we'll pivot to that question after this, but as are growing in this space, but yet we kind of see some headwinds with interest rates, with other things, with kind of the very high, levels of return that are needed. How do you kind of evaluate the funding that's out there, whether it's for VC type money for, new startups, or for money for folks to kind of really expand their product? How are you seeing that these days? Again, for what you could tell us without, giving away too much, but especially in the view of what you've experienced in the past in other industries.
Yeah. I mean, I've raised over $350 million in my startup career. My first company was acquired by Microsoft, and the second one was acquired by ServiceNow. So I've been in the game of raising capital since I was knee high. Yeah, I mean, the best companies with the great track record and great management teams and, good, solid operations and analysis, they get funded, even in bad environments. You'll see that over and over again. But out of 100 companies, that's 2 or 3, right? The majority is trying to raise money to fix certain things, make the product better or reach bigger markets, and so on and so on. And so I feel that there are some buckets you can put different opportunities. One is large companies like Navtor and Vesson and these companies, where PE firms already got in and now they're making them bigger and consolidating, and they will put more money into it to, do better. And if they have to do a roll-up strategy, they will do that. They will fund that. So you can see that's happening, and you get all these. You saw Zero North joining forces with Alpha Ori. And again, that's possible because there's a PE firm that is allowing that to happen. Then there are companies that have, built their client base beyond one customer. That the one thing I saw in Maritime is that there's so many companies with like one or two customers, and it's very deceptive, right? Because I there's a couple of things I'm afraid of, right? I'm afraid of garbage in, danger out. I'm afraid of many point solutions that create silos. So you are always operating with different realities. One person's coming from the claims database and another person coming from the chartering database, and they go to a staff meeting and they have different numbers. And the entire staff meeting is spent on who's right and who's wrong, right?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
That doesn't create shareholder value. But the third one is really a sample of one company that says, we love you, you're great. Can you create a company out of it? Can you create fundable,
right, scalable,
And I think that's why a lot of these younger companies have a challenge, because it's very hard to pierce through the first 1 or 2 clients.
Right.
If you have, plus 20 clients, plus 2,000 vessels, you start getting in that phase. I see a huge amount of interest. People are not interested just in the digital processes that we provide, but the data we're collecting.
The data, yeah. It becomes a different story. Interesting.
And for me, that was even a bigger reason to work with BV, because if data is a big story, then a lot of bad data is a lot of bad story, So, so we need to actually, in order to make data a big positive story, we have to go to the root cause and make sure we do it right.
Interesting, very interesting. So overall, it's kind of even though we're starting to see different phases now, again, we're probably a little bit later in the game. It's the natural evolution that other industries have gone through. So as unique as Maritime is in many ways, we're not unique in other ways, in the sense of kind of how let's say in this case, investment the investment thesis looks at us.
There's more interest in Maritime now than 4 years ago, 3 years ago. That's for sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I suspect it's going to go, whether it peaks at some point. I don't. Hey, let me ask you this question. general, and just for those that don't know, I do provide questions ahead of time to our guests. So for those that don't know, I'm not setting everybody up here as I joke around. I'm not trying to trip anybody up. So Ali, here's one. Here's a question for you. It's on this theme, and here it is. And it was posed to me during the summer, and I love it. And when I have an opportunity to ask it, I like asking it. So let's keep it in the parlance of a soccer, or as the rest of the world says, football match. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Where are we in that match? Okay. Everybody knows there's two halves. There's a halftime. Maybe there's a shootout. In terms of the maritime kind of technology, the whole landscape, adoption, investment, everything you could say, where do you think we are in that process?
I think we are very early in the first half. And I also believe that beyond the second half, there's two extra periods. And then in the end, there's a penalty shootout. So this is a long game,
Gotcha.
And the reason is that because of regulatory requirements, because of changing technologies, this is happening so rapidly, right?
Right.
I mean, Maritime is not even talking about cybersecurity yet, which they absolutely should. Right.
Which I will be having a feature if you're listening. I have one of the things that I'm going to go for, that I'm going to be focusing on in 2024 is cybersecurity, and I'm about to line up a very important guest. So I'm excited. But yes, you're right. Cybersecurity and AI 18 months ago was rarely talked about.
Yeah, and like any hype cycle, first AI is fun. I'm making crazy images on my different tools that I have downloaded. But now you can actually get a narrative back when you say what's happening in this port, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, and also there was a post made by Western Bulk CTO Martin Yelle, who's a brilliant guy. He talked about what he's learned about Copilot and what Copilot can do, and he sees a lot of applications for his business using Copilot. So, so I would say, and then I'll complicate this football or soccer match a little bit further, and then you have you have people coming in and replacing other players. So you have I don't know how you say it in English.
Substitution. Substitution. Yeah. I had a great response from Kyle Henderson at Vision, who's on the container tracking side, and he broke it down to 3 parts. It was like, one part, we're watching the pregame show. One part, which is more the maritime related. I think he and I were aligned in that early first half, first 10 minutes of the game. And he said some of the back end post kind of tracking, the pregame is not even on yet. Yeah. And so he took a really interesting tact, and I thought that was one of the better answers I heard all year. And I tend to agree, as a whole, we're in the first kind of early in the first half, still getting the rhythm of the game and trying to figure out how to attack. I think, there are, to keep it in the parlance, there are definitely some scoring opportunities, but, the game hasn't developed a flow yet. Speaking of kind of all this and building on, the future and substitutions, I'm really glad you used that word in a way. One of the questions I love to ask is, and especially for someone like yourself, like for people who listen to my podcast, I went to one of the maritime schools. The only thing that I did, the box that I didn't check, is nobody in my family ever knew about maritime until I went to school there. And, so my background is very typical of went to school, went to sea, worked for an oil company, kind of did that sort of thing. You have a different background. So kind of 2 questions. 1, what kind of attracted you to the maritime space? And 2, what would you say to people who are looking at the space? Let's say, we talked about, kids, we have children, kind of different ages, but all that kind of considering careers or had careers or had to consider careers recently. What would you say to them if they said, maybe one of their friends and they said, hey, I'd like to get into maritime, or I'm considering a career path. Do you have any advice? Especially someone like yourself that has had, variety. What would you tell them?
Yeah, I would tell them that don't be shy about asking for help. This is not an industry you fake it till you make it. They will smell it out and burn you at the cross. This is not a place where you try to pretend anything. So I would have never done this if we weren't intimately involved with Stena. And then we added Stena Bulk, because they were owner of this platform. They spun it out, and not just being a client, but being a real engaged advisor and looking at each feature and helping us with all kinds of stuff. I mean, there's no way I would have done that, because it's in all my previous companies, maritime or shipping was not on top of my key target markets. And then we added more to that ecosystem, and by doing a joint venture with IFCOR Galbraiths, where we have a company called Maritime Carbon Solutions that's for carbon tracking and monitoring and optimization eventually. Doing fantastic well, 150 subscribers on the platform already, large oil majors, so on. So now we have this incredible group that is giving us input, guiding us our direction. And then now again with Bureau Veritas. So you see the theme here is that I've always realized that I don't know everything. And when I identify the gaps, and in this case was deep maritime knowledge, we made sure that the team I bring together in the company, but also everybody around us, getting a pure financial investor was not something I was interested in, right? Because they're going to ask me the same questions I'm going to be asking me. Now that we have all these strategic investors, at some point we may be open to financial investor, sure. But I had to really build the foundation. So as a person or as a company, don't be shy about asking for help, and really don't assume anything. Go back to the school bench and learn things.
Absolutely.
And one of the good conversation I had when I first got into this was with you, Chris. So I try to learn from everybody, and the whole industry is also changing. So the industry itself is learning and changing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, learning, I looked at just my own personal career, from whether it's sailing, I kind of had more of a track where things built on each other. And then I pivoted 5 years ago into product management. There was a lot of skill sets there that I had, because I think, I can draw the line, believe it or not, from shipbroking and product management. It's not that far apart, because you're always balancing. You always have to, figure out what's the strategy, what are we trying to do, but also have to put out fires, which if anybody's been a shipbroker or listened to the previous podcast, you spend a lot of time putting out fires. So that is definitely something. And I think, but, I had a lot of great support staff internally for the companies I worked at, like, hey, how should this work? And even now, even yesterday, I had a question, like, I got this question and it was more of a process question. I was like, I don't understand why I'm even being asked this question. Like, is this normal? And we worked through it. But even now, and I've been doing this role for nearly 5 years, I still think it's great to learn and great to understand. And it's part of the reason why I'm doing the podcast, because I think we talked about this a little bit earlier off the line. I don't know everything and I don't know everybody. And when people tell me that I'm an expert, I say, yes, I am, in a very narrow path of the maritime industry. I know commercial. I know how I have a greater sense of the industry. And I think I've mentioned this before. I went to Icebine back in November, and there were 2,800 people in the room, and I don't think I knew anybody. And there were people who do jobs, and, there were port people. And I sat with the great folks from the port of Hamburg and talking to me about what they do and roles that I really don't know about, and I couldn't sit into their shoes. So I think it's a wonderful industry with a lot of different variety if you look for it. But I do think if you ask questions, people are willing to help, which is always nice. There
There are.
doesn't seem to be
I just,
a lot of siloing, which is nice.
exactly. I just want to add one more thing, and that is, let's say you find out how a ship owner operates, and you create an understanding of how things work. And then you go to pool operator or technical service provider or port authority. All of a sudden you realize they're looking at the same data, but in a very different way.
Right.
And that's also from the vendor perspective, that's also a confusion. When at high level, I look at the market and I think I have thousands of competitors. But when you look beneath it, somebody's serving this part of the business and somebody's serving that role, or
Yeah.
somebody's serving that persona.
Yep.
Somebody's supporting this specific workflow or that specific workflow.
Yep.
So when you really get down to it, there's not that many companies, but that makes it difficult for the
Consumer. Yeah.
consumer, because they have to understand, okay, like for example, a lot of people still think that a VMS is your BI tool, right? It's not. So let's not put too much disappointment on that because it does what it does and it does it well. But then like database, you had to have a BI tool on top of it to get anything out of it. So I think, yes, learn, but keep the learning window open, because
Absolutely.
even if you learn how ship owners operate, pool operators may do
Ah,
the same thing very differently.
or if you have, we understand how bulk operates. Go talk to an LNG operator or container operator. A little
Oh,
different. You go from a bulk operator, maybe 2 or 3 BLs, to a container ship operator. Yeah, I got 2 or 3 BLs in one container, right? Because I got it's a broken so yeah. Let's good luck with that. But yeah, that's what amazes me about this industry, and what I think I tell people who are interested what could be a great attraction to it. As we wrap up here, one question I love to ask, and being a CEO and managing all these partnerships and learning, and like you said, not necessarily with fundraising, but having to manage that as well. I always love to ask this, and I've got a lot of different answers over the years, over the year and a half. What are you reading? What's on your bedside table? What do you bring when you take a flight or whatever? What's of interest to you now? And I've gotten everything from science fiction, fantasy. I've gotten people tell me, Chris, I have a young family, I listen to audiobooks. I've had people say, I listen to podcasts. I've had people tell me they're writing books. So what's on the agenda there?
The podcast and the audiobook that I'm listening to right now is Elon Musk new book by
Ah,
Isaacson. I'm one of those people that find him extremely fascinating, nerve-wracking, fascinating, and
yeah.
I don't have like made up my mind whether he's a villain or a hero yet. But I love Walter Isaacson's biographies. The other ones he's written have been tremendous. Other than that, I'm reading as much as I can about the industry, and
Right.
it's a lot of news coming out every single day. There's
Oh yeah.
Atheists are doing a lot of great reports, and then I've been really into intermittent fasting. So
Ah,
a Norwegian author that somebody introduced me to, and I'm seeing enormous benefits of not putting stuff in my mouth all the time. So
I've done a little research in that. Not something I've pursued other than maybe try 12 hours, which is not full fasting, but you know, uh, let's say you eat at 7 or 8 o'clock, don't eat until at least 7 or 8 o'clock the next day, and I could typically get to that point. For those that know me, I have one really big vice, and that's the sweet. I have a sweet tooth, which
oh, me too, me too.
I need to curb a little bit. The one book that I'm not reading yet, it's a book by the album producer Rick Rubin,
Hmm.
and I ordered it the other day, and I hope to have it read soon. Maybe over some weekends. And that he wrote a book about the creativity and the creative process. And at least me personally, like I've said, I've gone to a maritime school, and everything is very structured, right? And most of the work that I've done is structured and things like that. And I find that I find myself attracted to learning about the creative process because it's never been tapped, which is the part of the reason why I'm doing the podcast. It's informative. It's informative, but it's also part of my own personal creative journey. So I look forward to reading that soon.
I really appreciate that you're doing this because human beings, we learn better when not being sold to, right?
Yeah. And that's, I think I described it before. I try to make my podcast informative, informal, informative and informal, right? If you get a lot out of it, great. But, I'm not going to be, lecturing or anything like that. Well, Ali, this has been a pleasure. Thank you for coming on the podcast. I appreciate it and wish you and the company best of luck. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for thinking of us and including us, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Absolutely.